meeting for December 10th. And our first item of business is to call the roll, please.
Deidre Cromie, Jennifer Hedderly, here. Abby Knopper, Ed Lowing,
Here.
Pat Markovich, here. Keith Rechtel, here. Stacy Ashland, here.
Thank you. And then we'd like to know if there are any agenda changes, requests, or deletions, or batting order, or should we just carry on? No changes, that's fine. I see no members of the public, so I don't need to ask for oral communications at this point. So we'll move right on for approval of 38 pages of draft minutes from the November 19th meeting. And comments on those? Commissioner Markovich?
I actually do have a change. It's very rare. Page 30. I'll let Catherine catch up. Line 217. It says inaudible. I actually said Alma Plaza on that. Put that on there. And then under line 239, it says inaudible. And I believe I had said spoke to that. Or Deirdre had said spoke to that. Because she was referencing an earlier statement I had made. That's it.
Okay, others? I did notice there were a number of inaudibles, so, as opposed to audibles.
That one.
Commissioner Hedderly?
On page 48, line 1001, where it says crosstalk, should be at Cubberley. You added synthetic turf at Cubberley. And on line 1991, it's the GOT space report, not GOTT fields, it's GOT and then space.
There are two or three of those got
Yeah.
space references that should be corrected.
And then, sorry, I did have one more.
Go ahead.
On 1030, on page 49, there's another crosstalk reference. It says, I can take the field changes relative to the land bank, I believe, is what was discussed there. Thanks.
I had a couple on page 29. Picks this stuff up literally, so I guess Commissioner Hedderly's talking y'all now instead of you all, so kind of interesting. Under comments, there's on line 195, there's a word missing where after the word gestalt, it said it doesn't like, which is obviously needs to say look like. And on line 206, whatever I said, I don't think I said which is a bad job. Getting cars off the street. I think it's probably I said which is hard or something like that. Let's see. I think those were all mine. Yes, Commissioner Cromie, you had a couple?
Yes. Line, my thing is page 24, maybe it's 982, under Commissioner Cromie, a comprehensive, the inaudible is approach. And then page 40, I have a couple on page 40. Okay, so line 534. I'm sorry, 535. Based on the policy, it's okay, but I think I said based on demand. And 536 into the various priority groups. Line 539, instead of outside the policy, outside the prioritization. line 542 is a typo, meet to met. Their needs are being met. 561, after the word seasonal, add play. There's seasonal play. That's line 561. Okay, that one's been taken care of. Let me see, I think I have one more. Well, there's a word left out on line 170. Page 52. I don't know what it is. Maybe someone can help me. The important thing that we're working on is the company that's doing the analysis. The mitigation analysis is what I meant. The mitigation analysis. Okay.
All right, can we have a motion to approve the minutes as corrected?
I so move.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, aye. Any opposed?
I abstain.
One abstention. Thank you. Okay, the second item of business is an update on the EIR, the Environmental Impact Report, for Palo Alto Municipal Golf Course reconfiguration and the Baylands Athletic Center expansion project, and also a discussion of an important part of that, the related tree mitigation plan. So we have a number of guests tonight to help with that, and I'll turn it over first to Rob DeGoose.
Good evening, Commissioners. Rob DeGoose, Assistant Director, Community Services. Good to see you all. I'm joined here by Joe Teresi. He's a Senior Engineer in the Public Works Department, is the Project Manager for the Golf Course Reconfiguration Project, and is shepherding the EIR through the process. And we have Walter Passmore here, who's our urban forester, has been working with a number of you folks and other interested parties on the tree mitigation plan, which is sort of the last piece of the EIR that we're trying to put together before we have the final EIR ready for the council sometime early next year. So I thought we'd have Joe Teresi begin by just talking a little bit about the EIR process and what you can expect next, and then we'll pass it on to Walter.
Thank you, Rob. Again, I'm Joe Teresi, Senior Engineer in Public Works. So I'd like to kind of get you up to speed on where we are with the project to implement the golf course reconfiguration from several aspects. We're continuing to work with our golf course architect on the plans and specifications that will be used to bid the project, and recently we've received what he considers to be the final documents, and they're under final review. So the project itself is pretty much wrapping up in terms of all the details that we'll give to a potential bidder. We're also in the process of doing a pre-qualification process with bidders so that we are going to only accept bids from qualified folks who have to meet certain criteria as far as experience, financial strength, ability to have the bonding that's necessary to build such a large project, and that will ensure that we get a high quality contractor when we enter into construction next year. We're continuing to accumulate soil on a portion of the golf course that will be used to reconfigure and reshape the course. What else? We are about to submit our applications to the state and federal resource agencies who have to issue us permits in order to do the construction. And then lastly, we have the EIR. As you recall, we brought the EIR through the process with the Architectural Review Board and the Planning and Transportation Commission and yourselves, and got comments. We're wrapping up those we've received all the comments on the draft document, and now we're wrapping up our response to those comments and planning to take them to council. And right now that is scheduled for February 3rd. And when we go to council, what we'll be asking them to do is basically three things. One is to certify the environmental impact report. Secondly, to approve what's called a site and design application for the project. And in this case, when I say project, I mean only the golf course aspect, not the athletic center portion of the project that's addressed in the EAR. And thirdly, to approve a park improvement ordinance, which will allow for the improvements to occur on the golf course. So this evening, we're going to talk about one particular aspect of the environmental impact report. As I said, we've passed the comment period, so we've received comments from boards and commissions and members of the public, and now we're responding to those. And the last piece that we haven't quite finished yet is exactly how we're going to mitigate for the impacts of the loss of the trees that will be taken out as part of the golf course project. So we're here tonight to focus on that particular aspect, and Walter Passmore is going to go over where we are in that process and is looking for your input so that we'll be able to finalize that last piece of the response to the comments in preparation for bringing the EIR to council early next year for certification.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for your participation as we've adapted this mitigation strategy to try to answer some of our constituent feedback that we've received and also feedback from this commission. So I hope what we're presenting tonight is quite a bit better, and we have resolved some of the issues that were brought up in previous discussions. So we are trying to distill a black and white approach from shades of gray, which you realize that defining nature is almost an impossible job. And so that's why I named the presentation this way. This is a very short presentation, and you do have information in your packets. It's much more detailed. So why do we need to mitigate? Tree removal on public property is required to be mitigated by city ordinance. So that's reason number one, enough of a reason why we need to accept or adopt some kind of an approach of how we're going to mitigate the trees. Number two, it's required by our CEQA process, as Joe mentioned, due to an unavoidable impact. We're going to be removing 543 trees, and we're not replacing that many. So we have an unavoidable impact. CEQA demands that we address that and describe how we're going to mitigate for that impact. Number three, there's definitely values to the community. There's values to the golfers, and there's values to advocates from many groups, as you've heard in previous meetings. So how do we go about mitigating? This has been a subject of much discussion, and I think we've summarized a lot of feedback into the approach that we're presenting tonight. Number one, we are allowed to do tree replacement with a ratio based on the canopy size per specifications in the tree technical manual. This is our most commonly used approach, our traditional approach, and we intend to employ that as a portion of our mitigation. We will be replanting trees on the golf course as part of the renovation, but that does not satisfy our complete mitigation requirement. The second approach is canopy replacement. We're also proposing to do canopy replacement in a somewhat untraditional way by protecting some trees on the preserved property that have been naturally established. We heard early on from constituents that they did not like the idea of planting thousands of trees to replace the canopy that is going to be lost, but they were not opposed to protecting naturally established trees and allowing those to mature, thus replacing some of the values that that canopy gives us. We looked at appraised value. We did not think that this was an approach that was as relevant to the conversation as some of the other ones. And we also looked at ecosystem services as a way to try to have an equivalency established between replacing trees and replacing other plant ecosystems or habitat in the Baylands environment, which naturally does not have a lot of trees. So how do we go from a golf course that has a lot of trees on it to something with less trees and satisfy our mitigation requirements? That was where our constituents said that ecosystem services calculations sounded like a reasonable basis of establishing a value of how to move forward with that mitigation. And then finally, we're going to be talking about a hybrid approach, because when we got the consultant's report back on ecosystem services, we recognized that that only captured a portion of the services that those trees currently provide. Unfortunately, science is not advanced enough that we can calculate a dollar value of everything that trees provide. So how much to mitigate? That's a real question that we hope to receive some feedback from the commission tonight on that. We can mitigate by number of trees, by square feet of canopy, by the value of loss of trees or the services that those trees provide, by the value of the outputs that are designed to replace that loss, or some kind of hybrid equation. And that's what we've been talking about with our constituent group most recently, is some kind of equation where we have trees planted on the golf course accounting for a portion of our mitigation, trees protected at the Arrastradero Preserve as a portion of the mitigation, and finally, Baylands habitat restoration. Now, what that final sum is, I think still is yet to be determined. I'm going to describe some evidence that we have, because I've already told you that the ecosystem services calculations that we performed on the value of the trees to be removed was not a comprehensive assessment. It did assess values that we can quantify, such as carbon sequestration, air quality values, stormwater management values, but there are a number of values that we cannot quantify. We reasonably assume that things like wildlife habitat, especially for threatened, endangered, rare, unique species, is of value. We don't have a good model to quantify that into dollars and cents. Native plant communities that are contiguous to rare or diminishing ecosystems such as the bay wetlands, grasslands, oak savanna, or riparian corridors, we recognize that those are very valuable. It's hard to put that value into dollars and cents. Water quality pollutant capture is accomplished by trees. We don't have a good model of how much the new landscape is going to capture as far as pollutants going into the rough areas in the golf course. It may be somewhat similar, but we don't have a model to actually quantify that. There's other values such as mental health values, general health, speed of recovery for people recovering from diseases, enhanced learning environment because of natural elements in our community, recreational activities, and when we're thinking about the golf course, such things as bird watching, walking, waypoint finding are all compatible activities with golf. So how do we combine what we can calculate quantitatively with some of these qualitative values that are a little bit harder to grasp? I think the ecosystem services calculations were a basis, and our constituent groups recognized our consultant study as that, as a basis for establishing a real value to move forward. We also heard from our constituents that they wanted to know what some of the output values look like. So if we had to plant trees using a traditional approach, how much would that cost us? How much would it cost us to do baylands restoration? How much would it cost us to plant seedlings with this canopy replacement approach? So we've generated those cost estimates, and in your packet you can see that there's wide variation, and it depends on a number of factors. Some approaches, such as planting a park tree or a street tree, are very predictable. We have pretty good cost estimates for that, and the cost goes down as we have trees that are grouped into larger projects so that we can get economies of scale, and we drastically reduce our costs when we can irrigate as opposed to watering with our truck. So that's a very easy cost to estimate or quantify on that output. And the range goes from having a couple of really large-scale projects to having a lot of very small-scale or individual projects. The seedling restoration effort, a little bit less certain, so there's a little bit more risk in that approach, and that's why the cost has more variation in it. And then finally, the grassland or native baylands habitat restoration is probably the least certain. We have the largest chance of failure, and it's very costly to restore native grasslands because of the preponderance of invasive species surrounding those grasslands or native baylands habitats that we're trying to restore. There's a huge variation in cost as well, going from projects estimated for a 36,000 acre project over 50 years, estimated at $1.4 billion, so about 40,000 an acre, up to individual projects which are in the realm of $200,000 an acre. So you can see there, that's a very costly process, and probably the least certain as far as success goes. Requires long-term monitoring. So over the course of the 10-year restoration period, which we're projecting for tree establishment, we still will be fairly uncertain with grasslands or native baylands ecosystems. So there's a few different project options there. What we've heard from our constituents is that they would like a minimum of $200,000 worth of funding, and they would like that divided into a hybrid group of projects. Number one, and these are in priority order, is establish new trees or native or naturally simulated habitat within the golf course to replace some of the values lost by the trees being removed. I think that's never something that we departed from. Number two is to restore and or substantially improve native bayland spaces near the golf course. So that would include sites like Bixby Park. That would include sites near the landfill, near the water quality plant, in the Baylands Preserve, and we've prepared a map in your packet with some of the proposed project sites that the constituent group thought were potentially viable sites. Those do have acreages on them, and you can see that there's enough acres there that we could more than expend $200,000 just doing Baylands restoration. And then number three, that the group felt was important to include was to protect naturally occurring seedlings on the Arastradero Preserve to enable them to mature and replace some of the lost values for the tree removals. So that being said, I know we're still a little bit in shades of gray. I didn't give you an exact approach, but what we're hearing from our constituent groups is that they want a minimum of $200,000 worth of funding, and they want it applied to those types of projects that I mentioned.
Thank you. That concludes sort of the staff presentation. We're happy to answer any questions on any part of the EIR, or particularly focus on the trees.
Okay, and just to review the timeline, the EIR is hopefully going to council in February. Is that correct, Rob?
Tentatively scheduled for February 3rd.
Okay, just people are aware of that. Yeah, is there any public comment on this issue? I don't have any speaker cards, so.
Sorry, I didn't see what speaker cards were.
Thank you. Okay, this is the only speaker on this issue, so you can come up and speak to the issue. Linda Ruthruff, did I get that correct? Okay.
So I'm Linda Ruthruff, and I'm here on behalf of the California Native Plant Society, the local chapter, which I'm the volunteer conservation coordinator, and the Audubon Society. We appreciate that we have been included in this process and that our concerns are trying to be addressed. One of the concerns we have about the three proposals put before you is that they are to some extent measuring different things. The first two are looking at replacement costs. So saying we've lost this many trees, how much will it cost us to replace them? How much will it cost us to replace that value? The third one is looking at what was the value of what was lost, but it's not looking at how much will it cost us to replace what was lost. So it's kind of the difference between when you have insurance on your home. If you have one type of insurance, you get a settlement of a certain amount of dollars, but it's not enough to build your new house, to replace what you had. If you have replacement cost insurance, you now have enough money to rebuild what you had. And so we are asking that you come up with a proposal, the hybrid proposal, that would allow us to replace the value of what was lost, so that there would be enough, not just saying that, well, we're going to lose this many trees and we're going to replace this much value, but we're not up to the standard of what was there before. We would like the amount of money that would be allowed to, that it would cost to replace it. So you have estimates in numbers 1 and 2 that are much higher than the estimates that are in number 3. I also have a slightly different take on what some of the constituents said at the meetings where we gave feedback. And I think that they saw that in Arastradero, a lot of the trees there are about the same age, and many of them are, not in the greatest of shape. And there are some naturally occurring saplings that are coming up. And the easiest way to get trees replanted there is to just protect those saplings. And in terms of cost per tree, that's going to be the least amount of cost that you could do, is to take care of some of those trees up there. And so I think that was actually a high priority. It certainly is for Audubon and for the Native Plant Society. And then past that, we are hoping for restoration of the areas that he's indicated, and that they be restored with native plants that are appropriate to the area. And I think that everyone is on the same page on that one. So I thank you for your interest in our feedback.
Okay. I don't see any other speakers on this topic. So open this to questions, comments from commissioners. Yes, Commissioner Cromie, you were on the subcommittee that
Yes,
looked at
I
this.
was wondering if I could lead off.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Passmore. Nice presentation. I was able to attend the last 2 meetings for the stakeholders, and this was a lot of information to digest in this report. And I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to the first page, and that, is this a time where we can give, I don't have questions, well, okay, let me ask some questions, and then I had comments. Do you want me to do everything at once?
Well, maybe we should just go by quickly for questions, and then go back around for comments.
Okay,
Just
great.
Give everybody an order in here.
So this is, you pretty much answered this question, but I'm just going to ask it as a clarifying point. So we do notice that we have 3 alternatives on the first page, and we've been given a cost range for the first 2, and the third one we're not given a range. And so I would like to ask about that a little bit, because I think it is a really important discrepancy in the numbers that will come out more during discussion. So could you please clarify how you got the range from 200,000 to 1.3 million on the first row?
Sure. The 200,000 is assuming 1 or 2 large projects where we could have the greatest economy of scale. We could water the trees with irrigation, and we could utilize smaller container sizes to accomplish the same goal. So when you have a large project like that, it really drives your costs down, and the 200,000 would be the least amount we could do it for. The 1.3 million is if we're establishing individual trees, we're watering with a truck, and we don't have that same economy of scale. So that's the very upper end. If we establish 1 tree, it costs us about $650.
Can you explain the range that you got on the second row?
Sure. Also, that's regarding economies of scale. It's much more variable with the seedlings, because it's uncommon to be able to irrigate, but if you do have a large number of seedlings and you have the ability to gravity feed irrigation, which we do on Arastradero with some of the areas that we have identified, you can drive the cost down with, again, irrigation, with group plantings, with having all of the trees installed and monitored at the same time. So anytime that you can generate those economies of scale, it really drives your cost down. Whereas if you're doing much smaller scale projects and they require that individual attention, then it's just, a lot more trips, a lot less of that efficiency that's involved with a large project.
If I understand correctly, it seems like the second row is a higher standard. The first row, you're talking about 2,000 trees, and the second one, you're talking about square footage of canopy. And so to me, is that also why the range goes up to 2.5 million on the second row?
No.
Can you clarify?
Right. They're different outcome values, because the tree ratio for the tree technical manual is specified, and most of the trees that we have out at the golf course would require either a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 replacement ratio with 24-inch box containerized trees. That's the standard in the tree technical manual. So it's a different way of generating that cost estimate. Whereas on the seedlings, we're requiring square feet of canopy to be replaced. So it's a total canopy replacement within 10 years. We had to generate that number a different way, and seedling planting is a whole different approach than containerized tree planting. Timing is much different, and we're planting a much larger number of trees because we expect higher mortality with bare root trees that are very small.
Okay, I wanted to get at that point. So I wanted to get at the point of risk. So we can set forth a plan, and so any plan that we choose is going to have an inherent risk, which means survivability of that which is being planted. And so can you talk about the risk for each of these categories? And also, I noticed that I believe it's missing from the third row. When you have a flat value of that plus or minus 130,000, I assume that there's no risk being calculated, the survivability of what's being done there. And I think that gets at the issue of replacement. So in the third row, which is set at 130,000, does that take into account risk of it really working for that value? Because the way I look at these numbers is that the first two rows might be higher because they're taking into account success. They're planning, the ranges go up high because as you try to do something more difficult, there's more risk and it costs more to be successful. And I'm worried that that hasn't been taken into account on the third row for ecosystem services.
Ecosystem services is a valuation methodology, not an output methodology for projects, whereas the first two are valuation plus output. So a traditional tree planting ratio with containerized trees, we typically have about a 98% success rate. So you have a very small risk. The seedling method for canopy replacement valuation, somewhere between 70 to 80%. If you have irrigation, it drops way, way down if there's not irrigation supplied. So 70 to 80% with irrigation, and I think that would be an acceptable risk for that project. On the Baylands restoration, which is where we use the ecosystem services valuation method to try to establish that equivalency. I've heard a variety of success rates. I think at our last constituent meeting, someone threw out a 50% success rate as maybe an average for the industry, but I think that these efforts have not been undertaken for enough years that we really have a firm estimate of what that risk is. So, you know, I think we can take the 50% risk of failure as something that is unproven hearsay evidence, but maybe that puts it in perspective of risk.
Okay, thank you. So this is my last question. Thanks for that clarification. So it's really the range of the first two values for the traditional tree planting and the canopy replacement really doesn't have to do with extremely high risk, especially if you have a 98% success rate. So what that brings us back to is the point that you made in your presentation, that it's really the type of planting that you're doing is what drives that upper range. So if I understand you correctly, what we're looking at here, in my eyes, from my perspective, is habitat replacement is tantamount here because that's what we're losing. One of the main things that we haven't quantified, that we're losing habitat, we have not been able to quantify it. Ecosystems does not quantify habitat, but we know we are losing habitat by cutting down the trees on the golf course. And so if we want to replace that, if you chose number one and you even went to go do a traditional tree planting to replace habitat, that's at the top end of your range. If I understand it correctly, you're not, the low end of your range might be going and planting a high volume of trees on a residential street or in a park somewhere. That's the lower end of your range, if I understood you. And then the high end of your range, where you get up to $1.3 million, is when you are going into a more difficult, unknown terrain of an open space and trying to establish habitat. Is my understanding correct? Or if it's not, can you clarify what does cost $1.3 million?
1.3 million is if we had to do 2,000 individual tree plantings. If we're doing 1 or 2 large-scale tree plantings, regardless of where they are, we can drive that cost down closer to the $200,000 number. So for instance, if we were planting 2,000 trees on the golf course, which we don't want to do, but I'm just saying if, then it would be closer to 200,000. If we're planting those 2,000 trees in 1,000 tree increments anywhere in the city, you know, we can still get the cost down to that $200,000 range. It's only when we start planting trees as individuals, we plant 3 trees here, 5 trees there, 2 trees over somewhere else, that the cost starts elevating.
Thank you.
Other questions before we get to comments? Yes, Commissioner Rucknell.
In the report, it mentions the plan to bury some of the trees on the golf course. Does that save money or does that cost money?
That actually would reduce the ecosystem services calculation.
I'm talking about construction costs for the golf course.
We're predicting that will save money on the construction cost, and it will also perpetually sequester the carbon contained in those trees. So that's why I'm saying it wouldn't be as much of an impact to bury them environmentally, plus we're saving some construction costs. So we decided that that was kind of a no-brainer to make that choice and opt to bury some of the trees that.
And they're buried deep enough that there's not enough oxygen to decompose, or what? Why do they not break down?
They break down very, very slowly at a rate that the carbon is absorbed into the soil, because soil has some amount of carbon storage.
Okay. Okay. And the protection of the seedlings, how would that go forth? What would be the process for protecting the seedlings? Are you talking about watering them, or is there other things?
No, primarily it's caging them so that they're not damaged by animal predation, and then monitoring them.
What type of animals would be, is it deer? Or? Okay.
Yeah, deer primarily.
Okay. On page 8, there's a table there with 4 different types of trees. Can you translate those, or are there common names for those? Page 8, table 4.
Oh, right. You're talking about the replacement trees that are part of the landscape plan for the golf course. The Rhamnus californica is a California coffee berry. It's a small growing native tree. The Mirica is a California wax myrtle, also a small growing native tree, and it's actually more common when we get closer to the bay. The Ceanothus, another native growing small tree, and then the Quercus agrifolia is the coast live oak, but the planting of those large coast live oaks is restricted to the buffer mound between what is anticipated to be the golf course and the other area yet to be determined, described as athletic areas.
Mm-hmm. And that's because of salt tolerance, or why are they restricted?
It was determined that large-scale trees were not appropriate for the design within the the main body of the course. So some were placed on that buffer mound area.
Okay. So of these four, would these be native to the Baylands area? If we'd come here 200 years ago, would be down there naturally, or are they not natural to that particular area?
Certainly the California wax myrtle, maybe fewer of the California coffee berry, probably fewer yet of the ceanothus, and it would be very rare that a coast live oak would establish itself in the Baylands other than in a riparian area such as next to the creek. So you may have had a rare live oak, next to the creek where it could have an adequate supply of fresh water.
Okay. And how do these trees compare for salt tolerance? If we plant them in the golf course, do we have any concerns that they'll be healthy 20 years from now?
Well, the live oaks going up on the buffer mound, that's not really a concern. The other three species are all fairly salt tolerant.
Okay, good. Okay, that's all for now.
I had one just pretty obvious question. I mean, we're trying to come up with policy here. I mean, ultimately, the council has to come up with policy. And first, a minor comment. I found the English in this report kind of difficult to decipher, so it may be, my question is that. But from the get-go of the executive summary, it basically says, this mitigation plan is going to do about half of what, is there right now. And it's articulated on page 8 and 9, where, I think Keith just referenced this, 91% of the trees are going to be considered small, so obviously big ones would be better just for that issue. And then it quantifies all the reduction on pollutants, stormwater, et cetera, et cetera. So am I just misreading this, that that's just literally in the golf course acreage, and then the rest of it, we have an opportunity to restore that other places?
Correct. That is just for the golf course. It does not include the value of burying some of the trees so that we reduce our carbon footprint impact there. And it only includes the trees that we told them were in the landscape plan, referring back to that table 4.
Right. So the rest
right,
of it is,
that's only the golf course.
so the rest of it is made up with Bixby and Rastradero and so on.
Correct. That's where we make up the difference between what's represented in this report and what's required for full mitigation.
Okay. And then just related point is when they say that this difference is, I think it's supposed to say accrue as opposed to accrual annually, what's the math on that? So are we saying this is a comparison so that you kind of multiply the delta by 10 relative to the golf course replacement situation?
You can, typically with environmental projects, your time frame is much longer, but the 10-year time frame is specified for canopy replacement in the tree technical manual. So we defaulted to that as a conservative estimate of what would be required to mitigate the impact.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from any commissioners? Okay, let's do it. Okay.
One more follow-up. So doing the math, we have to get about 6 acres of trees, at least on the first page. If you look on the first page of the second row, that 264,000 square feet, that's 6 acres.
Yes.
Okay, and then on the next page of the map, we have a variety of sites, some which we may use, some we may not, that range anywhere from 2.5 to a half acre, quarter acre. How much grassland is up at Arostadero Preserve right now? Do you know? Darren, do you know how much?
What was the question?
How much grassland is up at Arostadero?
A lot. Boatloads.
Darren Anderson, Open Space Parks and Golf, approximately 100 acres of the 700-acre preserve.
Okay, thank you. Okay, because I was wondering how serious is this the worst case scenario, if we put all 6 acres up in Arostadero, how much of an impact would that be? If you have 100 acres of grassland and you're losing 6 acres, doesn't seem to me that that would be a large impact to Arostadero, particularly since that was native oakland. We aren't planning to carpet all of Arostadero with oaks. So to me, that seems, you're just shaking your head.
Well, the whole point of having these stakeholder meetings was the original plan was to put about 2,000 trees in Arostadero Preserve to do this mitigation, a high volume. Maybe that would reduce the cost of the mitigation. But the conservation groups have weighed in very articulately about that, saying that's not a good idea to put that many trees in Arostadero. So Arostadero, long ago, used to be a woodlands habitat. Right now, it's a grasslands habitat, and it's a thriving grasslands habitat. And from what I've learned from the experts in conservation is that that's what we're missing out in California is we have a shortage of grassland habitat. So the idea from the stakeholders is it's not a good idea to plant thousands of trees. Maybe it was even up to 5,000 at one point. I guess the original idea was 5,000 to 7,000. I've kind of heard various numbers, but huge numbers, and people said that's not a good idea for the ecosystem in Arostadero. So we had these series of stakeholder meetings, and what came out of the stakeholder meetings was a tiered approach. And the approach was to do something in the Arostadero Preserve. A good compromise was to protect naturally occurring saplings, just help the natural regeneration by protecting those trees that have sprouted. And so another idea was we should do something closer to the site where the problem is taking place. And so there's been a huge amount of interest among the stakeholders to actually do something in the Baylands. The problem is that we don't need more trees in the Baylands. Those are not natural. So that's the conundrum. We want to do something in the Baylands, but we don't want to plant a whole lot of trees. So the idea is to do this equivalency and replace trees with grassland habitat in the Baylands. That's what the stakeholders came up with, that compromise to do something in Arostadero and something in the Baylands. So if we can move into the discussion about that.
Yeah, if you're done with your questions, that's where we want to go. Did you want to launch discussion?
Yeah, I would like to.
Okay.
I was the only commissioner who was able to make it to the last stakeholder meeting, so I sort of wanted to report back that there was a lot of dissent with the ecosystems report. I'm not sure any stakeholder was very happy with the report, and I know that Mr. Passmore completely understood that in himself, had some, he understood the limitations. So we all discussed those, and it's just we have to do our best with the information we have at hand. And so this number of 130,000 is really a bare minimum kind of mitigation, and the group definitely felt it was way too low because it just doesn't take into account all the different parameters, and it doesn't get at the replacement cost, which is what we're trying to do a valuable mitigation would be to replace what's being lost. And so what was discussed was this minimum idea of at least a couple 100,000, and I'd like, if we can as a commission, I think it would be nice if we can banter this about a bit and decide maybe some number. Now, I would throw out what I think where I think it should be is around 500,000. And the reason I would say that is because that gets closer toward this idea of replacement, that really to get some value of some habitat restoration value, we need to go high enough that we can be effective in that effort. And if we look at what's being done around us, we're talking about $1 million to landscape the water processing center. You know, that's a lot of money. I know that Palo Alto is not paying all of it, but doing restoration is very costly. But I think that we have a lot to gain from doing the restoration. We are going to get a lot more use out of the Baylands. I think that we're willing to we already have some money to test out this concept of planting islands of native plants. We have a CIP for that, and by using mitigation money, we can expand that approach and really get enough, sort of like some bang for the buck out there. If you put in too little money, I think you might end up with nothing at the end. And what I would say, I think a good approach would maybe to protect 500 saplings in a Rostadero preserve from that money, to have a pot of money and put some of that toward a Rostadero and then put some of it toward restoration in a way where we can get at some kind of replacement cost and be realistic about what it might take. And another thing I'll throw out is we have a CIP on our agenda today, which is to redo a parking lot for the golf course, which costs $600,000. So in the scheme of things, we are putting money, if we can put money into a parking lot, which again is a valuable asset. The golf course is being remodeled, and the reason we want to spend money on a golf course parking lot is to get the full value out of it. And so I'd say if we're going to do a mitigation where we're actually creating habitat, which is very hard to create, we need to spend the money to do it effectively.
Other comments from commissioners? Yep, Commissioner Markovich.
I think I'd mentioned this before. If you're looking to just bump up numbers of trees, you can, it's kind of piecemeal, but look into when you redo the parking lot at the golf course to put as many trees in there as you can, because that's great to have shaded parking areas, and I think it would go a long way towards helping balance this out a little more.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of opportunity with the amount of parking that's out at the golf course right now. If we employ some techniques to get more viable soil under those parking spaces, that we could have a fairly dense tree canopy where right now there's almost none in the parking lot.
I'd like to ask a question on the comment to Commissioner Cromie. That 500,000, are you saying that's intended for all kinds of restoration or trees specifically?
No, not trees specifically
Okay.
by any means.
Good.
So
That's what I want to clarify.
I would say to go by the priorities that came out of the stakeholder meeting. So it was carefully vetted how the priorities should be organized, and I think there was good consensus on the prioritization. The final meeting, we vetted it even more. So I'd say that lump sum would be for all the projects on the priority list. And again, I'm proposing the 500,000 to get at a range rather than the bare minimum.
Other comments? Yep, Commissioner Rectal.
On the second page where we show the map of the different candidate, can you give me some insight into what are the most likely and the pros and cons of those, let's say, 5 sites?
Those sites were all very accessible, and the better access that we have, the more that we can monitor the site, the lower the cost of actually taking out all of the invasive plants that would prohibit the natives from getting established, the more that we're able to monitor those sites and maintain those sites. So there was some really distinct advantages of those sites, plus they were in sore need of restoration. So they met a lot of the parameters that the constituent group was looking for as far as Baylands habitat restoration.
Are there any high priority versus low priority, or are they all equally?
I think they're all fairly equal. Obviously, we would have to do more exploration once we decide upon a final funding amount, so that we can see how far we can stretch that, and also it's yet to be determined if there's any sources of leveraging that we might be able to use to stretch mitigation money a little bit further.
What do you mean by that?
Possibly grants, partnerships with organizations that are already doing Baylands restoration that might be willing to partner with us on cost. There's 2 very large restoration efforts that are ramping up right now, starting to acquire some funding, and there's potential that we could partner with someone and really stretch this money out further.
What about other spots like the levees? You can't plant trees in the levees. Can you plant bushes there? Are there any type of other vegetation that could be allowed in the levees?
I think that's a remote possibility.
Just because of the structural issues with the roots?
Yeah, it's actually not permissible to plant any trees on the levee.
But how about shrubs or other cover?
It's pretty restrictive.
I think the problem is, of course, with shrubs, you wouldn't expect too much of root penetration, but the fact that it covers the surface makes it harder to inspect them. And it's important to be able to inspect them for cracks and for rodent holes and things like that. So that's partly why you can't plant on the levee.
And if I can add to that, are you talking about sections on this map, like A, for example?
Well, A is not a levee, is it?
There's a levee that's not a flood protection levee, but
Okay.
that's one example where not just planting on the levee, but there's also 40 feet between that and before you get to water, where we do have naturally occurring shrubs,
Okay.
coyote brush, California sage. Ones like that would certainly be part of the palette of restoration that happens there. It wouldn't all be low-growing marsh plants because those typically taper up where you're closer to salt marsh, that you get tidal inundation. Those are where you get your more halophytes or salt-tolerant plants. As you slowly get to higher ground, long before you get to the toe of the levee, like I say, there's 40, 50 feet in some areas. That's where you get some of those upland shrub varieties. So you could have a wider array of plants that would fit into that restoration palette.
So what's the path forward then? Next decision, is there a formal plan that gets submitted, or who's at bat?
Walter can expand on this, but I think Walter will have another meeting with the stakeholders committee, and we'll take feedback from this commission back to that committee, which I think will help them move forward. And then it's the plan sometime in early January to have a complete mitigation plan that we can include in the final EIR for council certification.
Okay, and some of that would be performed with the golf course, and some of it would be performed in future years, or what's this?
The actual mitigation itself?
The planning
Correct.
itself?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Abby, you have a comment?
Thank you so much for the report. It's very thoughtful. And I think that a lot of the questions or I don't want to use the word frustration, is that there isn't a one-to-one if we replace this canopy versus doing this, so it's not a direct one-to-one ratio. And I think that when we're considering our comments and our thoughts as a commission, we have to think about strategically what we want to accomplish here. And to Deidre's point earlier, here's a rare opportunity for us to really make an impact in an area with this mitigation that has been lacking a little bit, and that restoration would be very helpful for all of the reasons that you've laid out with regard to habitat and greenhouse issues, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that we just have to, or at least this is what I'm thinking I have to do, is think about the priority with regard to what, as a city or as a commission, we want to accomplish. Yes, obviously, we want to try to preserve as much canopy as possible, but that isn't the only thing that we should be thinking about. We have to be thinking about this on a long-term environmental impact. And that differential between the cost, the $200,000 versus $1.3 million, I mean, that's a huge financial differential. And I would hate for us to make a recommendation to council that's a minimum. Because, again, going back to money for projects like this is very difficult to come by, and it takes many years and time and meetings. And so to get the most bang for our buck, so to speak, I think is something that we really need to consider. And whether it's 200,000 or 500,000, keeping the stakeholders' thoughtful comments and expertise, as well as the staff's expertise in mind, is very important too.
The one comment I just want to make is that, this is Palo Alto. So the phrase could be trees are us. So, I mean, I don't want to be flip and say this is the most important issue in Palo Alto because there's a ton of them that are, but this is, really almost a symbol of the city. So, to the extent that we can address this and try to get close to, over time, full mitigation somehow, whether that's multiple, discussions of budget committee and so on, I think we want to get there. And then secondly, if we don't, as a city, we have to make it very clear to constituents what's going on. I mean, citizens, not the experts or us, but why we can't get there. So that would just be comment/direction. Go.
So just one final comment. I know we're all trying to arrive at a very holistic approach instead of just doing a one-for-one, replacement of trees with trees. We're trying to do something that is more appropriate for the ecosystem of the Baylands.
Right.
And we know that golf course did not naturally establish itself there, but we're trying to have a brighter future than what we have today. And that's where the real challenge is that, we can't adequately describe all of these values, and an acre of bay habitat may be worth more than an acre of trees in that same area. So it's not necessarily an apples for apples calculation. We've done a lot of work between staff and our constituents who've been very involved to try to arrive at an approach where we do have a basis to establish an amount. And I think, that's another challenge, is that we have to establish justification to arrive at a certain dollar figure that is then going to be applied to these projects. It's definitely not an easy task, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness of all the commissioners on this very complex issue.
Yep, very fair. Thank you. Okay, without, what?
I did have something to say.
Oh.
I'm deciding what to say. I'd just like to say that I do like the idea of the hybrid approach, and I'm happy to hear that there seems to be a lot of consensus around that. But obviously the numbers are where we run into the trouble, and it's hard to compare. I wonder if surely other jurisdictions have run into exactly this same problem doing development in the Baylands. Have they not been as attentive to mitigation, or have they come up with a way to value restoration versus traditional tree planting?
I think we're dealing with a project of unprecedented scale here. Our traditional development activities, even in the Baylands, are impacting many, many fewer trees. And you're talking about projects that are, large construction type projects. So they have the opportunity to put trees back in a fairly dense manner in their development project, flanking their parking lots and between buildings, whereas we don't have that same opportunity in the golf course if we really want to employ this more Baylands looking design.
Okay, so when you talk about using the ecosystem services as a baseline for coming up with ideas about how to value various things, would it be fair for us to expect then a recommendation might come forward suggesting we do this much containerized tree planting, this much canopy replaced, this much seedling protection, this much habitat restoration, and using that ecosystems model, that's how much value we would get from that distribution of improvements?
We could calculate some of the benefits, but some of the benefits, as I mentioned,
Right.
are qualitative. We can't calculate them.
But to the best of your ability, you would use those, whatever resources you have under the ecosystems analysis to compare. So we can look at a chart, for example, and say, okay, if you're going to put this much money into the seedling restoration and this much money into tree planting and this much money into restoration, we can have some idea of what the benefits, ecosystem benefits we would expect to get out of those based on the ability the model provides.
Some with limitations, yes.
I wanted to follow up on Commissioner Hederly's point. A problem that I had with the Ecosystem Services report, if you go to the table on page, well, it's table 3, and here's where the ecosystems group tried, quantified the parameters that they find quantifiable. And so there's a list of them starting with stormwater management and going hence through the table. Well, and all of those come up with dollar values, and you can see those dollar values on the right-hand side of the table. But what's really interesting is when you get down to air quality, which is the second line from the bottom, you now have these negative numbers. And what happens here, if you read the report, is that certain trees emit products that combine with products in the air and produce smog. So what happens is, like, let's say you're cutting down a bunch of those trees that happen to do that. That gives you this negative value that you have to subtract from everything. So you get all these benefits, but then you get these dollar amounts that you need to pay to account for what you're losing, but that you then need to subtract from that to account from what you're gaining. And so here the gain is the elimination of the pollutant trees. So this is all very technical, and it makes perfect sense when you're talking about pollutants. But if you're talking about a bird who's flown in from the Arctic, who just wants a place to land, they don't care if they're landing on a polluting tree, which I take are some of these eucalyptus. They just want a tree to land and to rest for the night. And that's what you can't quantify here. And so I have a lot of problems with these values because it's really only a partial list. It's trying to get at something that hasn't really been fully developed yet. So I think it's an interesting exercise. I think it needs to evolve further to be highly productive in terms of coming up with numbers. I think it allows us to at least quantify where possible and then have a baseline that we then need to jump from to go into the discussion of what's not quantifiable and why it's not quantifiable. And I think we can still make a case to go beyond this report.
Okay. Sure.
I think what Chair Lowing and what other commissioners have said about the importance of, justifying tree loss or, mitigating tree loss and the importance to Palo Alto is a huge issue. And if we overlook it now, we would definitely hear it from the community. And I'm just wondering, I understand absolutely the value of the habitat restoration and the cost and the risk involved in that, and I'm glad that we're doing proposing a hybrid approach here. Just wondering if, we couldn't look into some longer term mitigation that as part of this mitigation, which doesn't replace tree for tree by any means, we could contribute to trees or dollars to Canopy or some organization that could have a a longer-term impact on the canopy in Palo Alto. I don't know particularly, Rob, if that's something that we can suggest as a commission, but I wanted to throw it out there for discussion if others are interested.
Yeah, Rob, did you want to respond?
Well, I just wanted to, so everyone's had their comments, I think, and just sort of see if I can understand where there seems to be consensus, and I think there is here, on the three tiers that the stakeholders came up with. The first tier being of most importance is establishing new trees, native or naturally simulated landscape within the golf course as sort of number one. Number two is restore and substantially improve native baylands spaces near the golf course. And then the last one being protect naturally occurring seedlings in Arastradero. It seemed like everyone was fairly supportive of those tiers in that order. Mm-hmm. And so the real question is the money, $200,000 or more. And I think that's where the stakeholders group are going to have to sort of wrestle through that. I do want to mention that budget is, it's not endless. It's a big project. With cost of redoing the golf course is at $8.5 million, I think, is where we are right now. And the golf course operates in a way that it has to fully pay for itself. So the mitigation money, whatever that is, would need to be paid off by the golf course business, and there's limitations there. That's not to say we shouldn't do the right thing. We absolutely should. We need to do meaningful mitigation, but I don't know that it's an opportunity to do, everything we would love to do out in the Baylands. So.
I had a quick question. There isn't a line item in the golf course budget for mitigation, correct? So that 8.5 million doesn't include, that's just the golf course.
That's correct.
So this is this is money that's going to have to come from a different source to be put into this project.
It'll come from the loan that the city will take out to pay for the golf course reconstruction. So it'll add to the cost of that loan.
Okay, thanks again to all city staff who presented this and is working on it and will continue to do so. The next item on the agenda is Scott Park CIP, and Darren Anderson and the ad hoc committee is going to present that. This is a discussion item, not an action item for tonight. So Darren, if you'd take over, please.
Good evening, Darren Anderson, Open Space Parks and Golf. I'll give you a quick recap of where we came from on the CIP originally to the latest information, and my colleague Peter Jensen, the city's landscape architect, has a revised design for the park, and he'll walk you through that momentarily. Again, this was a 2012 CIP, originally intended to just replace the older damaged park amenities. In August 2012, we had our first public meeting, and at this meeting, bocce was suggested as an amenity we would add to the park. We did an online survey in July 2013. About 85% of the respondents said yes, they supported bocce. However, there were numerous comments that highlighted impacts from residents who live very close to the park, saying, there's other factors such as noise and parking that could seriously be detrimental to the neighborhood if you added something like bocce. On August 27, 2013, staff brought a park improvement ordinance to the commission with a design for Scott that did include a bocce, and the commission did not support it. We formed an ad hoc committee and hosted another public meeting on November 21st, 2013. Peter Jensen created the revised design for that public meeting, And the meeting really focused on creating consensus around a lot of the items that were kind of in question, but we thought we could get there on agreement on. That would be moving the picnic areas out from the more secluded area, adding bike racks, reconfiguring the basketball court, and adding these elements like sand and water to the sand feature. And the meeting was fairly successful. We did reach consensus on numerous items, and I'll wait for Peter to pull up the revised design so you can see those. And so in that aspect, the public meeting was a great success. And in another term, in another regard, it was also successful in elucidating that we didn't have consensus on the bocce. And it gave an opportunity to these various stakeholders and residents to say, hey, this is how we feel about it. And they had the opportunity to have a back and forth, both with the ad hoc committee and in some degree with the advocates for bocce. And they went back and forth and had a bit of a dialogue. And where it ended was without consensus on that one. You had the pro-bocce enthusiasts basically saying, this is the appropriate site. We think it's a quiet and appropriate activity for this park. We believe that residents in the neighborhood adjoining parks are to be expecting that there'll be some noise associated with recreation in those areas. And conversely, those that did not feel bocce was appropriate highlighted that noise is an impact and that they want to retain the character of a quiet, more passive park like Scott, and highlighted concerns about potential parking issues as well. So what staff is really hoping to get from the commission tonight are really feedback on this design with, of course, the special focus on how to handle this bocce situation. Do we add it? Do we not? And then ultimately we'd come back to the commission asking with a revised design, a final design, with the park improvement ordinance to move forward and then go on to council.
I'm not quite sure what happened to our computers, so we'll go old school.
Okay. As I mentioned, at that public meeting, Peter Jensen presented a revised design that incorporated some of the elements that we'd heard from stakeholders, including the commission. And in it, you can see, as you turn to attachment B of your handout, and I believe that's what Peter's got the hard copy out here, you'll see that the bocce has been moved to expand that turf area. And Peter can kind of point to that perhaps and illustrate that you've got a larger, more usable turf area. This was generally met with agreement with the stakeholders at that public meeting. You can see that the playground is no longer in the rear of the park in that more hidden area. Again, this was feedback from the community saying this is a secluded area, it's not seen by police who drive by, and it sometimes draws in people who are doing inappropriate activities. So by pulling the playground, and you could see the sand, the swings, and another element that was requested and added in this most recent attachment B design is the spring toy. It was a requested item, and we're able to accommodate that. In the sand area, there was some talk of, can you have a water element there? And the ad hoc committee very wisely said, you've got a drinking fountain right adjacent to the sand area. Rather than adding an element that sometimes can be expensive and problematic with flooding, can you add a little spigot at the bottom that would both service dogs for water as well as kids with buckets to bring water over to the sand area? And it seemed like a great suggestion, and that again has been incorporated in the design. Another element was a suggestion by participant in the meeting, a vegetated row separating the basketball court from the that playground area and picnic area so that balls wouldn't come by and inappropriately hit folks who are sitting or eating at the picnic area. Peter, do you have any other thoughts on elements to the design that were modified?
Yeah, I think in general, from the comments that we received from the first meeting and further conversations about the bocce ball, that's kind of where it led to this design, which is definitely a more full revised renovation of the playground than what we talked about before. I think the first design really just looked at the amenities that were there and left most of those amenities in the location that they were. There is currently now a little asphalt paved picnic area that sits back by this heritage oak tree. Well, in the design, I think we were going to do that again, since we have the ability to look at that now. That's something that I would probably move away from that oak tree and create some more permanent surfacing. And that then started to drive this design where we started to use the main view corridor into that park to really capture the main activity and use user area there for people in the community being able to see that it's located there, as well as it being able to be patrolled and looked at, so it was open in that space. And then placing the bocce ball court more in the back allowed the turf back there to be reconfigured in I think a more usable, larger space, which again I think just adds and enhances the park itself. So again, I think at this point, I felt that in the meeting it was the consensus of the group that they liked this plan and this new layout that we had. It's really about the bocce ball court now, and if it's going to be part of the park itself, or if it goes away and just becomes an expanded turf area. That's kind of the other option. So.
Thank you, Peter. The only other thing I'll add to that is there was kind of a nice benefit of the public meeting where, unaffiliated with the park design itself, everyone in the entire room had said, you know, what would be terrific is if you could address the problem of that crosswalk on Channing at the Scott Park Junction, where numerous cars come by without noticing that there's a crosswalk, and it's a threat to pedestrians and bicyclists. And staff met with Transportation Department, and we talked it over, and it's now on the short list of places where they can potentially add flashing beacons, much like near the Channing House. So that one looks like it will happen. And with that, we turn it over to the Commission for questions and comments.
Yeah, maybe the ad hoc committee should speak. I just want to thank the majority of this commission who showed up at this meeting. So there were 4 commissioners and 6 residents. No, teasing. 12 or 15, and 2 or 3 staff members. So it was great. So who's going to?
Do we have any public comment?
I don't know if there's any public comment on this item. Okay.
Do you want to talk, Shai? I think one of the tough questions about bocce ball that we struggled with on the ad hoc committee was whether or not this was the kind of decision that would be aided by the long-range master plan, helping us identify whether this is a need in the broader need in the community, and if this is the right location, or if maybe it would be better at a bigger park. This is a tiny park for increasing intensity of use. And I think the conclusion we reached was that it actually did make sense to move forward with bocce at this site, primarily because there was such strong support in the neighborhood. So it gave us an opportunity to test out the pilot, to call it a pilot, if you will, test out whether it is really successful or this is a passing fancy, and after 6 months nobody ever uses it again. It was unclear whether we would get this level of detail from the long-range master plan on a park neighborhood by neighborhood basis. So our feeling was that it did make sense to go ahead and try out bocce at this site at this time. And we also liked all the other additions. The other, aside from the vegetation between the basketball court and the picnic tables, I think, Peter, you also added that whole row of bushes along behind on the far side of the bocce court, and that we're hoping is going to, all of those new plantings will help with some of the reverberative noise from basketball as well as bocce. And interestingly, those of you who are there probably remember some of the strongest opponents to bocce did not object to the basketball court. They were fine with the experience of having basketball there. It was really the increased intensity that they were looking for. So I think we have some folks with noise concerns and some folks with intensity of use concerns. Do you have any?
It makes us a little uncomfortable, the fact that there is a kind of a split decision in this neighborhood. But we can't let that stop us from doing the right thing. I think in this case, the right thing is to do bocce. I think the current design that Peter put together is very nice. It'll be very usable for anyone who doesn't want bocce. Bocce is along the edge of the park and will not affect the functionality of the park at all. You still will have a nice turf area, both in the top part next to the bocce, but also you'll have a turf area down below too. So I think this will be a very usable design. I think it's very nice. The point I want to make about the lack of consensus is that when you say lack of consensus, it makes it sound like there's hot debate. There really, in all the meetings, been 2 people who've been against it, and there have been on the order of 10 people for it. So that's a very good ratio. That I think that the neighbors have shown their dedication, that they've come to several meetings requesting bocce. I think this is a very good location. The park is very small. There's not a lot you can do there. You can't play baseball or some of the larger sports. Bocce does fit very well. It's a neighborhood park. There'd be activity that you could do. You just walk down the street and play your bocce. So I think it fits well with the park. I think it will be used because the neighbors show such good support. So I really think that this park design should go forward with the bocce in it. It'll give us good evidence whether bocce, is the maintenance cost going to be troublesome? Will it be used? It'll be a very good pilot program, and we can see if it works well, we can extend it to other parks. And the other thing is that the people who are complaining about it, it wasn't like this park was constructed after they moved in. They moved in with the park there. They knew the park was going to be used. That's the purpose of a park, is to use it. So even though I feel some sympathy for the noise, I think the added noise for the bocce will be very small. I think the number of times they close their windows because of the bocce noise will be far outnumbered by the number of times they close it for the lawnmowers that are cutting the lawn, or for the people playing in the Todd area. I think the noise that bocce will add is very small. I think 2 years from now they'll accept it and it will not be a big deal. I think this is a very good decision.
One other thing that we were concerned about was we didn't want to be developing a facility that would end up being exclusively for the use of a limited number of neighbors. So we talked some about access to the equipment you need to be able to play bocce. And I think, Darren, you were going to look into whether we could have a set that you could check out at the library, with the downtown library being right a block away, frankly. Were you able to make any progress on that?
I haven't got an answer back on that one, but I'm looking. I did get an answer on, there was another question the ad hoc committee mentioned. There's a row of trees on the senior facility on basically opposite of the little playground there. And there are older trees, and the ad hoc committee said, it'd be great if we could get those out. They're actually not city trees. They are property of the adjacent owner. But we can make contact and see if they're willing to move on those, to see if there's an option of replacing some of those older trees that are really in need of replacement. But it may be subsequent to this project.
Okay, any commissioner comments? Yes.
Look at that.
Now it comes on.
Was that for me? I was the one commissioner not on the ad hoc committee that went to the meeting. And I have to say that I think that this is a great plan. I think that you all really took the neighborhood comments and integrated it. I think it's going to be a wonderful addition to that community, and I think that the enthusiastic bocce players will be very happy. I had no idea personally that bocce was such an enthusiastic sport to be excited about, but I'll go try it. And you also moved the benches from the last time, because that also came up in the community meeting, and I thought that was really great, and the little bouncy swing. So I really think that this is very well done, and really took all the constituencies' comments into consideration.
I really like this design. I visited the park around the time we had our first meeting on this, and just looking at this design, it's so much more vibrant than what's there now, and I can hardly imagine how many different activities are possible in this small space. I think you've done a beautiful job integrating so many possibilities here. It's a lovely design. I really thought the tot lot was misplaced in this park, sort of in that deep corner, and if we are going to recommend the bocce, I think it's in a really nice location, removing and getting the children into a more open area. I also like how this park appeals to has a multi-generational appeal. It's a really lovely example of this, where it can hit all different ages and also different activity levels. I've been able to play bocce myself, and it's a really fun sport, so I can attest to that. A couple questions I have are, I hate to even suggest it, but is there a lot of support for the 4 tables? How many tables are in the park right now?
I believe it's 4.
Yeah.
And some of them are different lengths. There's a few ones that are not standard length. The amount of seating capacity is roughly equivalent to what is now proposed in this plan. Also, that one was discussed at our last public meeting, and we discussed, they asked those questions. How many are there? Is the proximity to the basketball court correct? Are we going to have problems there? It was nice to have that dialogue where there was some back and forth, and the group did buy into both the location and the size of that picnic area.
And because I was only thinking if you took away 2 of them, you could expand the tot play area. Did people, is this neighborhood park getting the same square footage of the tot play area that they currently have? Is that staying the same?
I would say yes. It's very close to the same square footage, and the amenities that are there now are basically what will be placed back as far as the tot swing goes, and then the bouncy riding toy. The other thing to consider too with the playground itself is that Heritage Park is very close to this playground, which does have a very good playground facility. So instead of trying to, I did look at putting other features, play equipment, a play structure in this playground as well, which could have the possibility of being where the sand is, but I felt that it was better just to maintain the existing elements that were there due to Heritage Park being so close and that having a bigger expansive playground at that location.
I wasn't thinking of a play structure. I was thinking of swings for older children as well. I'm a big proponent of that. I think they're great fun. And if it was made larger, you could possibly fit in 2 extra swings. But again, if no one in the community brought that up, I don't think at this point it would be necessary to rethink that, although I'd like, as we develop parks, to really pay attention to having the older swings in parks.
I think one of the issues was the landing area for older swings is very large. So
yes, it's a bigger kids swing set basically has a much larger fall zone, and it takes up a larger area, much more difficult to incorporate in there. The other difficult part about it is the separation of the tot lot swing as compared to the older kids swing. Technically, they're supposed to be separated instead of put together as one piece of equipment, just because the size of the kids that are playing on them. So normally what happens is you have 2 basically swing sets, one for the older kids, one for the younger kids. Due to this fall zone size again of swing sets, you take up a very, very large room for that. So that's why usually you don't see them kind of both together in the same playground. So that's then again why I think we just stuck with making this playground a tot lot. For tot age kids 2 to 5 basically, instead of allowing then another apparatus that would basically increase the age of that playground. And again, looking again at Heritage Park and it having the swing set there. So.
And again, I just want to clarify, did anyone ask for that kind of swing set?
We did talk about it, yeah, it was mentioned, and the consensus was let's leave it for tots.
Okay. Okay, and then in the report, I think there's a mention of sound barriers around the basketball court. Can you just describe that a little bit? Because I am sensitive to how much noise basketball does make. It's a wonderful sport.
Right.
But we're bringing, the people who live near the basketball court now have the tots. I don't know how particularly noisy they are. But they also have the picnic tables now, which were in the current situation, do picnic tables exist next to the basketball court or not?
No.
They're in the other corner opposite of the playground. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I remember. So we are. So I'm very sensitive to just the noise factor for those residents who are getting a net increase in volume of people in that area. So can you just go over how you're planning for that?
Yeah, we discussed it. There was a couple questions saying, is there any way we could mitigate? Is there anything you could sort of build up or screen somehow. And the truth is, no, it's not something you can silence. The one good suggestion Peter had was the existing backboard is an old metal frame that does vibrate, and that is a little louder. And so you might be able to bring the sound down a little bit by putting in a more modern fiberglass unit that doesn't have quite the vibrations. But what I heard from the residents was it was the dribbling on the pavement basically that causes this reverberation in that little horseshoe area that causes them trouble, and there isn't a way to mitigate that.
Thank you.
I should, however, point out there were other residents on Scott who commented on that they hear the basketballs at their home too and acknowledge that it is loud and that they like it. It signifies people are out playing and having fun and they like that element. I should also note that the gentleman who lived and said he represented the condominiums across the street of Channing said basketball's not an issue. It's been there for 25 years or whatever the case has been, and they're content with it. He just didn't want bocce added.
I just have a couple of very quick questions. In the new design, are we plus or minus on turf?
It would be minus, but it's reconfigured in a way that makes it more usable.
Okay. So it's minus in terms of net turf from the last plan that included the bocce court?
That's correct. Oh, I'm sorry, from the last one that had bocce? No, I think we...
I don't
Yeah,
know
pretty
the
about the
exact
same.
square footage. I would say it's pretty close.
Yeah.
Again, though, I think the configuration of the new plan does make that turf area more usable. Out there now, it's kind of meanders around and makes these little pockets of turf that are tiny little areas of grass that aren't as usable as a bigger, more unified space. So,
Okay. And net change on cost for this plan?
I don't know if we have a revised plan yet, but I think it's in the same ballpark.
Okay. Other comments on this side? Down there? No? Okay. Good to go. Bring it back next month.
Okay, excellent. And I just want to confirm the general consensus is we're looking generally positive about both the design and bocce. Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Unless you can get one more playing field in the middle there.
I can't make space.
Okay, the next item of business is to do some debrief on the study session that this commission had with City Council. And if there are any issues that came up that require or we want to have discussion about setting up ad hocs, we would do that at this point. So the vice chair and I kind of put our notes together and came up with a list, and she had much better notes than I did, but together we have a list of stuff, and you guys can add to that. We have one council member with us to help us remember these things, and I just want to remind everybody we are televised, so be nice to all these good council members that are working so hard. So the one thing that came up again by us was proposed by us is some new activity to look at kind of shared use dog runs, because the way of trying to work them into parks as they come up for renovation just hasn't worked, either because the EIR didn't allow us to do that, or space didn't allow us to do that, or whatever. So that's a first and obvious one that I think we should talk about, taking action on. Yes, no? I mean, the obvious thing to me is to put together an ad hoc and, launch on this thing, but.
I'm sorry, sir, you're asked, because I obviously wasn't at the meeting with the city council, so what you're asking is, should this even be a discussion point for the commission? I'm sorry.
What action should we be taking on the issue of shared use dog parks? And the logical one is to put together an ad hoc and get some momentum around that with the community and with various options in terms of location, and just kind of get on with that one. It was very well received, I think, by council in terms of that's innovative. Let's see what we can figure out on that and come back to us.
And it's kind of coming full circle. I sat on the last ad hoc committee for the dog parks. Did anyone else here sit on that? I know it was Commissioner Walsh and I, and maybe Commissioner Loesch for a while. And it's coming full circle because that was the last thing that we examined on that ad hoc committee, and we were very excited about shared use. And
Well, your career might not be over. Here's another opportunity.
I'm not sure I'm going to go on that committee, but I can just tell you that the reason we moved away from it was we felt like we had some opportunities with a lot of parks coming up for renovations, and that maybe we could go the direction of trying to get the real thing. And we, know that that hasn't borne the fruit that maybe we had hoped for. So I think it's good to go back to it. And there are a lot of examples of shared use to look at. One very close by we all talk about in Menlo Park. And we also looked at some of the literature coming out of San Francisco. I believe they were moving in that direction as well. So I think it's the right thing to do to form a subcommittee.
Okay, other comments on that? No dissent. Go ahead, Keith.
One of the things that the council is concerned about is just making sure we do the due diligence and do the community outreach and make sure we come to consensus, and that some people may not want shared use, and let them express their opinions on that.
Okay.
One other question. One thing that didn't come up was the use of school yards for this. Is that just off the... That would never be a shared use.
Okay, I was
know it's
PTA
used
president.
It's used I want to say informally. I know that all schools are being used for areas for dog play. Informally. So that's just too messy of a topic.
Oh, you have
Messy
no idea.
the
school
obvious.
that I was in, when I was PT president, Addison, had the worst problem with people who didn't clean up after their dogs, and it was just horrible beyond belief. And then moving on to Jordan, that was also an issue there. So.
Well, theoretically, an ad hoc committee could evaluate this, but
they could.
You got good feedback.
Yeah, I certainly can get a lot of feedback from the school community on that one if you need it.
So people that'd be interested in working on this commission is the next question, I guess. I mean, not this commission, on this ad hoc.
I'll do it.
Okay. Abby's one. We need at least two. Okay.
Oh, can I ask?
That feedback will go with you then. Great.
Can I ask a clarification question on the shared use of fields? I definitely thought that was a good suggestion as well. But does that preclude the Councilmember Holman had mentioned about potential use of Sterling Park or Sterling Canal? Does that preclude that, or would that still be?
That would just be one of the locations that would be considered by the ad hoc.
Okay,
Yep.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question since I wasn't there? What about part of the ad hoc is renovating the Mitchell Park dog park that's currently there?
I think that'd be up to you guys.
Can that be part of it?
Yeah, I mean, the idea was to look at shared use specifically as an issue rather than renovation, but if you come up with that, then I don't see a reason to exclude it. That'd be my opinion. Jennifer?
And you ought to consult with Darren Anderson on that as well, because I know he's been through hoops and jumped over hurdles and struggled mightily with Mitchell Park over the years. So you don't want to duplicate all that effort.
Okay, good. So Abby and Pat. Another item that that was on our agenda was a discussion of looking at the 10.5 acres that's out there in the Baylands, and our suggestion that we not go immediately to building fields, rather we should complete the master plan. And some feedback from some council members was that they were on record as having kind of voted for fields. So at this point, we've just gotten the highlights on that from Rob, and thank you for getting that quickly. And the motion was really to approve the golf course with space for up to 3 playing fields. I think I have that almost word for word. And that was what's in the motion. So space for up to 3 playing fields may mean to some council members that it's time to install 3 playing fields, or it might mean that to other council members that that was one of the options and other things should be considered. I've had a chance just to scan the minutes. And there was a lot of comment on fields and so on. I'd like to thank Greg Betts, who was quoted in there as saying that, the commission would like us to consider a lot of recreational uses, and that was in that set of minutes. So we were on record, and Rob made comments to that effect as well. So what I would suggest on this particular issue is that we already have an ad hoc, which is Jennifer and myself on this, is for us to kind of dig into those minutes and think about that a little bit and see if we should take any further action here. And if so, maybe by next month we could come back with some idea of what that might be to sort of formalize our loose recommendation in the study session around doing the master plan first. So that's what I'd suggest on that, but obviously welcome comment. Yeah, Commissioner Cromie?
Thank you. Did you send an email out with the minutes?
No, I just found it recently and I sent it to Chair Lowing, but I can send it out to everyone.
I think that'd be nice.
Yeah.
Thank you
Oh,
for
yeah.
looking that up. I agree with what you're saying. I think it's good for you to continue studying that on the ad hoc committee. I thought that Councilwoman Shepherd brought up some interesting points at the end, which have been on my mind, which is to put in a lot of fields there if we went the direction of 5 is there's a piece of that soccer parents really understand who go to tournaments with their children, and you're really getting in the business of running soccer tournaments and renting fields because it would be a regional draw. And that's what Councilwoman Shepherd was getting at. And so I know we're going to be gathering information on what gaps we have in services through our Parks and Recreation Master Plan and people's ideas and surveying the community. How do we get at that question of asking people to appreciate what it really means to create that kind of regional opportunity of tournament play? I was wondering if we could try to drill into that a little bit, and because it's a really big piece of this conundrum is, first of all, is the piece, do we need them? Well, first piece is what did they vote on? Do we need them? And then what does it mean to provide them? Our city hasn't done anything like this before. And so how do we get more realistic about that? Is there anything the subcommittee can recommend? Maybe it will have to do with how we develop surveying for the master plan community outreach.
Yeah, I think maybe we should take a crack at that over the next month and, come back next month with maybe some of that and maybe not. I don't know, because we just got the minutes and it's just fresh from last week. So, but it could go further and say, but if we did fields, this is what we have to evaluate. The location, the youth, which some council members commented on as well.
And the regional,
the best place?
And I really want to get in there that phrase regional draw, because it's right off the freeway. It will be, believe me, a regional draw.
Well, that's part of the tournament issue that you raised, right?
Right, so if we can just feed that word regional into it.
Yep.
I have a question. You're concerned about the regional draw just because they'll be displacing field use and residents won't be able to use them as much, or you just don't like that aspect of play?
Well, it's just bringing in the traffic, and it's monitoring it, staffing it, understanding the economics of it. We've delved in, we've had the kinds of pro formas done by experts on how much of a profit the golf course will yield. Well, when you're building, this is at a massive cost to build these kinds of fields, and then you need what return are you going to get from that? And do you want part of the return to be produced by it as a profit-making venture?
Although we have a fields use policy, so we could certainly put that in a certain priority. If we thought we didn't like that, we could make that a lower priority so all the local people get first crack at it.
Those are the kinds of things that.
Okay.
Right now, we're just kind of digging.
I understand why you're concerned about it, that it is big business, the soccer tournaments. But why is that bad if it's not displacing people who, if all of Palo Alto's field desires are satisfied, and we can also host tournaments, is that a bad thing?
It's a question of impact, environmental impact, so it has to be vetted. It's not, to me, it poses a series of questions that would need to be answered, and one has to go into it carefully by doing the proper evaluations.
It feels like we're getting a little bit off subject here of creating this ad hoc to start thinking about this, but if there's anything that's, pertinent. Did you?
No, I'll discuss it later on when the ad hoc committee brings it back.
Okay. So two items that came up could have CIP implications. One of those is the Lucy Evans, which I know is, I think, somewhere on ready for a CIP, right? The Interpretive Center. And that came up because people wondered if we were going to improve on it. So, but I think that might already be on the list. So the answer is embedded in the CIPs. And then the second one is the El Camino lights, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. But the initiation of that light project has to do with community outreach. So, we need to get moving on that part before we can get the CIP approved. Yeah, Greg?
Good evening, Greg Betts, Director of Community Services. I heard two separate questions about the Lucy Evans Baylands Nature Interpretive Center. I believe Councilmember Holman was concerned about the piers underneath the building that's actually holding up the whole structure. There is a CIP that is really intended for the sheathing on the outside, the exterior finishes, replacing the wood planks that are weathered. But I don't believe the scope of that project, since you would essentially have to lift up the building, move it to replace those piers, is going to do anything for the substructure of the building. So staff will be continuing to evaluate what the status of the piers and foundation of the building are to see whether that should be an additional CIP in the future.
Okay, sure.
Greg? I also was curious about, and it probably be a separate CIP down the road, the boardwalk behind it is really, I was out there and it's falling apart as well. Would that be a separate CIP?
There is a CIP for the boardwalk. And it's a real big question. Whether or not a replacement boardwalk, considering the amount of permitting that would have to go through Clapper Rail Alley when that was built, that quarter-mile trail, there was not the BCDC regulations. PG&E has boardwalks all over the place, which they're not allowed to rebuild. So while we can get permits for maintenance of sections of the boardwalk, as we have in the past, if we were to look at totally replacing that and going to a much bigger project, we could put the money into the CIP plan, which has been done, but whether or not we'll actually be allowed to do it by Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife, and BCDC, Regional Water Quality, State Lands Commission is a big question.
Is that why the trails under the power poles are fenced off, is it because they're just not safe?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And because they're not only, they're really intended just for maintenance of the PG&E towers. They don't want kids climbing on those electrified towers. There's no handrails to prevent falling off. Take it from one who knows as a kid. But there's no provision for those to be public access.
Okay, and then the El Camino lights, which was, well, I'm sorry.
Sorry, on the previous, on the interpretive center, my recollection from my notes from the meeting of that Councilmember Holman and also Councilmember Burt felt that it was more than just exterior and boardwalk and piers that they were referring to. Councilmember Holman says it's a little sad, really, and Councilmember Burt said needs to be made valuable and thriving again. And his example was for school field trips and suggested a possible avenue for collaboration. So just wondering, what does that? How do do we agendize that at some point, or propose that for a CIP, or take any action on that? I thought it was a really good point. I know that the other building, Sea Scouts building was redone, and that's a separate nonprofit. But the interpretive center is just kind of, I believe the staff was cut a couple of years ago, or even made part-time. And just wondering, do we do anything with that feedback from at least 2 council members from my notes?
I wanted to agree with that. I think it is a treasure out there because it's a draw, it's a focal point. My kids both went to the Baylands camp there, which is beautifully run, very high quality camp. I mean, the kids get to go kayaking, they get to go bird watching. It's a way to educate the local kids about the Baylands. My kids never looked at the Baylands the same. I mean, they could see so many more things. Their experience was more nuanced. And I went there for the first time about 12 years ago, and it was okay then, but it's really deteriorated. So I would hope that we can put it on our agenda and try to move forward and figure out what's already, look at the CIPs that relate to it in a comprehensive way.
Would the two of you like to form an ad hoc to start investigating how we might move forward on that issue? How and whether?
I'd be willing to do that.
I would as well.
So just want to, so there's 2 issues here. There's an infrastructure issue and a CIP-related issue, a number of issues around the interpretive center. But the second part of the conversation was really about operating the center and programming it and that type of thing. And we have endured a number of budget reductions, so we're limited in our ability to do that. Possibilities of partnering with nonprofit organizations are, we're looking at those more and more. And is there, a potential nonprofit like the Audubon Society or something that wants to, partner with the city and have an office there? Could be something that, would be valuable to look at.
Are you suggesting that the ad hoc should focus their efforts on thinking about the programming revitalizing piece, and that the CIP process has already begun to address the structural issues?
I think this, you could need to look at both of them, because I think, as Director Betts said, the CIP that's in the process now does not completely renovate the entire center for what's needed out there.
Okay.
So it would be both.
Okay, I surfaced this El Camino Lights and outreach. We can just pick that up again when we get to the CIPs to address the outreach part of it, just so that's a bit in context. And then another one that came up from our own liaison is the 7.5 acres at Los Trancos, which is there, and there'd be substantive issues to evaluate if we wanted to jump into that one. I don't know, Greg, would you like to articulate your comment and the possibilities there?
There's a very nice 7.5 acre plot of land which is just outside the boundaries of Foothill Park. It's owned by the city. It is deed restricted to parks and open space, and has not been used essentially for 20 years now. And so it's a sort of head scratcher. It's an extension of Los Trancos Valley, which, is that big meadow area with the interpretive center. It would run at least another half mile into the mountains. So it's a wonderful asset to have, but it's unutilized.
Why was it not made part of the park?
I guess the city council just never dedicated it. I don't know if there's a reason, but, things go on.
Is that also part of where the maintenance yard is?
Yes, it's right behind the maintenance yard.
Was it ever used for anything?
It was rented for a period of time to homeowners who were doing some building, and they were just using it as a supply yard. But it's not being rented now, it's sitting there.
I think it'd be a lovely place to do a walkthrough.
Yes.
Road trip. That'd be a pretty good place to start. Okay, why don't we do that?
We're going to have our retreats. When do we have the retreat?
It varies, February-ish.
We could do it then.
Yeah. Okay. Are there more, Jennifer?
Sterling Canal.
Carry on.
I think there was some discussion about the Sterling Canal and what opportunities that offered for such things as a dog park or community garden, and this is something that's come up before. We looked at it around the bike and pedestrian master plan, and I think we were kind of stymied by the confusion of rights of way and overlapping public and private land, but that certainly is an area that's of interest and potential great use for a variety of community resources. And if there are folks who have the interest in trying to break that down and figure out what the opportunities and obstacles are, I think that would be worthwhile.
I'm very interested in that. It was fascinating to do a walk through there, and we call it a Sterling Canal, but it's actually land. It's the canal must run underground.
Underneath, yeah.
So it's a nice open space. It's an area of town that can use some more amenities. I'd be willing to be on a subcommittee to look at that. And Jaime Rodriguez was very fascinating to speak with around that issue, and he took a couple of us on a walkthrough there.
For those of you who don't know, the Sterling Canal extends basically from Greer Park all the way south to East Meadow. Yeah, because it goes to Adobe Creek and Barron Creek. So it connects the creeks essentially from Matadero all the way south to Barron and Adobe, where they join at the Lefkowitz Tunnel. So it follows those power lines that go the whole length of the way. So a lot of folks have expressed interest in having that be an off-road walking and biking route to be able to stay off-road and get north-south.
Let's see, I guess I did a walkthrough once with city people, and the problem is the access points at both ends, the right-of-way have been given away, so they are now the parking lots of various commercial businesses.
I know Jaime Rodriguez was looking into some of those easements in planning for the pedestrian bicycle bridge, because some of those same issues were coming up. It's right at that connection.
Yeah.
So I know he was thinking about what he would have to do. I know that there are barriers. Do you think it's still worth pursuing?
Oh, I think it's a great resource, yeah. Just a magic resource, off-road bike path on an area that really needs a bike pathway. Yeah.
And there's been a lot of housing development there too, so I think there's a good population base to try to take advantage of something there.
Yeah, maybe the businesses would be happy to cooperate to get people there.
Any other ones? Any other ones from any of you? Yes.
Yeah, if I could just give a perspective from the council meeting. I agree with your 2 points on the dog runs and the golf course. I had noted that there was almost a majority of council members who individually brought those points up. So obviously they were on a high scale, and you identified those as the two big issues. Rob, you mentioned that you had found the minutes that describe that. I think it would be helpful to also include the city council on that, since that was an issue in which there was some disagreement among council members. So to have that would be helpful. And just to pass along that the informal buzz after the meeting was very positive. Council members got a kick out of the meeting. They got some important information. I think they were very engaged in issues that you brought up, more so than I've seen with other commissions. So I think the meeting went very well from a council perspective, and everyone enjoyed it.
Thank you. We tried to give them some things to chew on that were maybe controversial and important, and they seemed to chew. So it was good for all of us, I think. So are there any other questions on the council session issues?
Where are we leaving the forming an ad hoc to look into Sterling Canal?
Happy to do so if you want. We had one volunteer.
So if we have another, we've just formed another ad hoc?
I think you just raised your hand.
I'll raise my hand.
We should probably officially approve those ad hocs, the three that are now on the table. Do you need them read back as to who's on them, or are we up to speed on that? For the audio? Okay, go ahead. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have Abby and Pat, Commissioner Knopper and Commissioner Markovich on dog parks, and Commissioner Cromie and Commissioner Ashland on Lucy Evans Interpretive Center, as well as Sterling Canal. Is that it?
Yeah, and I would just encourage that we'll have staff involved in each of the ad hoc committees, and also if as a matter of protocol, I think we've talked about this before, is try and define as specifically as we can what the ad hoc committee is set out to do, and focus on the specific policy issue that you're focusing on, that you're going to advise council on, which, that may be the first thing that the ad hoc committee does over the next month.
Good guidance. So, all in favor of those ad hocs? Can we just vote? Yay? Any opposed? Okay, great. Okay, so the next item of business is ad hoc committees and liaison updates. And we've agendized, first of all, the capital improvement plan. Commissioner Rector and myself have been meeting with staff, Greg and Darren and Rob, multiple times. And I think what we've come up with tonight is kind of a net, that these are the ones that are, for a variety of reasons, prioritized for this year. And there's a scoring system in here. We can explain it, or Darren or Rob can explain it, to kind of prioritize that. And then there's some additional CIPs under consideration on the end of that, meaning that they're not officially in here, but there are ways that are being looked at to effectively add these to the list. One of the other conclusions that we made is that each year in the last 2 years, we've gotten further ahead of the schedule and the timeline, and Commissioner Rechtel and myself and staff have agreed that next year we need to move it up even more, like maybe a couple months more, 2 to 3 months more, so that Commission can have sort of more input on prioritizing some of these things. So in general, my feeling is I thought the process was good, just still not quite early enough, and that's one of our collective recommendations for the coming year. So do you want to add, Keith, before we go into this?
No.
Okay. So, Rob, you want to comment?
We're ready to sort of answer any questions that you have. I do want to thank Chair Lowing and Commissioner Rector. I think we had 3 or 4 meetings. Each were like 2 hours long, and they were good. They were really helpful, and so thank you for doing that. And just as a reminder, I don't think there's anything new in this report that wasn't sort of shared at last month's meeting on the 19th, where Commissioner Rechdel sort of went through each one of these. What you have is a little more information, description and justification, some estimates on what we think that they're going to cost. I'm not sure that was presented so much last time. And then a scoring. I do have extra copies of the scoring sheet that we use, and you might be interested in seeing this. Some of you may have already seen it, but there's a template scoring sheet that all departments are expected to use, and there's 5 sets of criteria around, is there a safety issue? Does it relate to council priority? That type of thing. And we, of course, looked at it through a lens of parks and recreation open space, and took a little bit of creative license in terms of how we scored it, because this score sheet is fairly generic across the entire city. So.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a good point that Rob raised, is that some of the verbiage in the scoring sheets, talks about, is this an improvement to facilities? And we're saying, well, are redwood trees facilities? Or, so that probably needs changing in the future too, but that's a more citywide issue.
Right. And so the other thing that helped guide this exercise that we went through was the iBrick report, and trying to focus in on the catch-up, keep-up items that were identified in that report, and also with and Darren Anderson in particular coming forward with areas of real concern that he has, like the community gardens and the many breaks we have there in the irrigation system. That's something that's just become an urgent issue that needs to get taken care of. So yeah, thank you for the participation, and if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them.
What? Yep, Commissioner Roby.
I just had a question. First of all, thank you for your involvement in this. It's a really nicely prepared report. I really appreciate seeing it. One of my questions was how the scoring worked, so I really appreciate getting to see this. And also, I remembered when we were talking about the Baylands Comprehensive Conservation Plan that Darren Anderson had mentioned that one issue is that staff is very involved with the Parks and Recreation Master Plan currently, and it might be that, I take it, maybe some of the same staff members would be doing both. I was wondering if, Darren, you could let us know what timeline you imagine for the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, when that might be finished.
The best guess right now is that it's going to be a 2-year process. As it started to expand in scope, I believe that's what we're looking at right now. And it would be really advantageous not to have them concurrent. That is, the Baylands CCP and this Parks Master Plan shouldn't be concurrent. I think one or the other will suffer if we do so. And hence the reason for pushing out for 2017, even though there are so many good reasons to try to make it happen sooner.
I was just going to put a plug in and ask if we could possibly try to move it up to 2016, just because so many things are riding on that in the Baylands, and I hate to feel that we might be doing some things inefficiently or creating inadvertent damage by not being sensitive to some needs in the Baylands. I'm asking just because of other work that is going on there currently.
Yeah. And I'm very sensitive to that and agree, the sooner the better. There's a couple things that to highlight that kind of address this in some ways. One is that very recently there's an adopted U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service comprehensive conservation plan that looks exactly the same thing: habitat, wildlife, and recreation, and how those 3 elements should be blended and formulated holistically. And that's for the entire area of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service around the Don Edwards Preserve. So it's part of the Baylands. The Faber-Laumeister Tract, for example, is Don Edwards Preserve. So many elements apply directly to what we do. And so in concept, a lot of that can be borrowed, incorporated, and utilized now, and has been and will continue to. So that's going to kind of tide us over in some ways, I believe. It's also, I hear sometimes there's a perception that it's kind of either it's not being looked at holistically. For example, oh, we've got some money, let's spend it on restoration. What am I going to choose? It's not quite so random as that. We have gone through an original process of looking at a Baylands comprehensive plan. I was part of that for almost a year, and we made it through a good, almost half, a quarter of it at least. And in the process, we vetted out quite a bit. We had numerous stakeholder meetings. We consulted with all the big regulatory agencies and experts in this field of restoration, in recreation, and what's appropriate for wetlands areas, again, deferring to Don Edwards Preserve. So it's not like we're flying by the seat of our pants and we haven't vetted this with our, either our neighbors or other experts in the field. We have partnerships with groups like Save the Bay that are going on well over a decade now. That's a very long time to have a collaborative relationship with an agency that's responsible for the restoration for the entire bay. So they've got an even bigger holistic view, right, of our overall wetland and bay, San Francisco Bay issues and needs. And so they can take that knowledge and apply it to our area. And it's a really, real strong partnership. It's not the kind of thing where they're out doing their own thing. They're in consultation with our staff constantly. And they are, though we started with a small section of the Baylands where, this is 10 years ago, they have stretched out and expanded. So they're looking at the whole park and the whole preserve. So I'm not saying that the plan's not needed, but I'm also want to highlight that we're not going in blind. We've got experts in the field advising us on where and what to do, where to put our efforts. We only have 2 staff out there. And we're utilizing, in the neighborhood of, I think it comes to almost 11 FTE just on volunteers. So it's a significant amount of volunteer labor that's put into the field of restoration for that site. So I just want to counterbalance that to say we do have some advice, we do have some expertise, and there is some guidance already. The plan is also necessary and will be great when we get there. But I think we can make it work with 2017, especially given this constraint with staffing and that parks master plan, which is also, incredibly necessary and as soon as possible.
I want to thank you for the leadership that you've shown in this area. I really appreciate the time and energy and thought and, level of expertise that you put into this. I really appreciate it.
Okay, anything else on CIPs? All right, any other ad hoc committee reports?
What's the scheduling for the CIPs? When are they finally announced and the money's awarded?
So the next step on the CIPs, so I don't have any specific dates, but now that all of the departments have submitted their CIPs with their descriptions and justifications and their estimated costs, there is an internal sort of vetting process now that occurs with the finance staff of the department. And then from there, it goes to the city manager who takes a review. And then from there, it starts going through the formal committee review, which is Finance Committee and Planning and Transportation Commission. And then eventually, it goes to City Council for adoption in June. So we can keep you up to date all the way along as we, if things start to fall off or other things crop up, we'll certainly let you know. So.
Okay, any other ad hoc committee reports? Yep, Commissioner Ashland.
Commissioner Hatterley and I met, a couple days ago. I think it was yesterday, actually, with about the website, the commission website, and we just spoke with the CIO, Jonathan Reichenthal, and somebody named Chris who reports to him with the last name I can't quite pronounce correctly. So we are kicking that off, and we don't have anything to share with you at this point, but we are moving forward, and we'll be talking further with staff about how to move forward on that process.
No ads? Okay. Any other reports? All right, then we move on to comments and announcements. Yes.
I probably should just pass on to the committee the council meeting of December 2nd. We had a special session called on planning. And we discussed a wide range of big issues that there is some planning activity going on in the city, and it includes parking and traffic, which are two major public issues at the moment, but also density, both housing and commercial densities, design, which includes sidewalks and pedestrian amenities, economic benefits, and comp plan updates. It wasn't an action session, it was a study session, so there's a lot of discussion of it. And we were given dates, a calendar of a lot of the pieces of this will be coming to the council over the next quarter. So through the first quarter of the year. And I know there's probably some of those where the Parks and Rec Commission would have an interest, certainly in the aspects of a comp plan, but also maybe some of these other elements as well. They're things that might concern you. So just that you're aware of that calendar coming up at the council for open discussion that might involve things of interest and importance to you.
Can staff help us a little bit with that? I know we've been getting this great calendar about upcoming dates. Can we integrate that in?
Other comments or announcements, Rob?
I just did a couple. I have 4 tickets here for very inexpensive golf play at the Palo Alto Municipal Golf Course. Really, or $22 during the week and $30 on the weekend. You can't beat it. The bridge course, and it's actually playing really well. So I'm going to leave those here. Whoever can get there first. We also have our Winter Enjoy catalog that has all of our classes for the department, for the Art Center, the Junior Museum, the Children's Theater. Is out, and resident registration began on the 6th, and non-resident registration begins at the end of this week. So if you want to sign up for a class, you better get on that right away. In fact, I think this would be great stocking stuffers too for your kids, and you can do a little note that says you'll sign them up for anything that they have an interest in. There you go. I think that'd be good. So I want to share that. And the last thing I had was we have the 29th annual Senior New Year's Eve Bash coming up. It's at the JCC. It's a really fun event. It's actually held sort of during the day, and they do a countdown at sort of the midday. But they're always looking for volunteers if you're interested and you're around. Let me know, and we'll get you signed up.
Great, thank you. With the pitch man tonight. Other comments, announcements on happenings? Yeah.
I had one question. We had the fee for services in September, and there's some feedback. What's the next step on the fee for services report?
I'm going to have to get back to you on that because I'm not quite sure on the next step. I believe it went back to Finance Committee once more for further discussion, yet to go to Council. But I'll send an email out to the entire Commission with an update.
Is it coming back through us before Council, or is it coming straight to Council?
I think this one is going through Finance Committee and then straight to Council.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more announcements, the last agenda item is the agenda. Looking at items for the January 28th meeting.
I got one. That would be the election of chair and vice chair.
Others? Good, that'll be a short meeting.
We got Scott Park. Be ready for
Yes, Scott.
an action item.
Will the tree mitigation come back?
Yes, the tree mitigation. Right. We'll have to see how things go with that. It could be that the commission may want to have a special meeting around the golf course and the tree mitigation because of the timing. If we do, in fact, get to go to council with a certification, we'll request them to approve the final EIR on February 3rd. The January 28th date for the commission meeting doesn't allow for a lot of time, then to turn that around and include the commission's thinking in the staff report that goes to council. So I'll have to talk to Chair Lowing about this. We've talked a little bit about it already, but the timing may be that we want to have a special meeting earlier in January around the tree mitigation, because that's important.
Should we just ask commissioners' availability with travel during that time? Can we just vet it a little bit?
We're talking the first, second, third week. What week are we looking at?
Look at my calendar.
Not likely the first.
It'd be at least the second week. And what the commission can consider also is that we have one meeting in January. We just changed the date and do it earlier to allow for the tree mitigation discussion. That's probably the...
Have me by vote.
I think that would be good, to just try to do it into one.
Yeah. So let's see here.
Do people know when school starts back up again in January?
6th. And then the 20th is a holiday.
Oh, Martin.
So it's the 14th.
14th is a holiday?
The 14th of January is the second Tuesday of the month.
Do you know when the Martin Luther King holiday is?
That's the 21st. 20th, sorry. 20th. You're right. So
I'd be in favor of that 14th because it's after people are back and it doesn't conflict with Martin Luther King holiday weekend.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm sure other things will come up.
So,
but if we need to move it to the 14th, that seems workable.
Can I, that's just a difficult.
You got to push your button.
Can we consider maybe the 21st? That's a difficult week for me, but if everyone else can.
21st is better for me.
Okay, thank you.
That could work.
There's a chance I'll be gone, but it's low enough probability that I'd be willing to risk it. I might get back to town just in time for the meeting.
Okay. So that
21st.
would be 2 weeks before the council meeting, so...
21st is difficult for me.
The 28th works. I'm just saying, because it's already in my calendar.
Yeah, and we may end up having a little more time, depends, we have a tentative schedule with the council on February 3rd, so if that changes, if it gets pushed out for one reason or another, then, we may go back to the 28th. But, so what I was hearing is the 21st was probably the best, although not for Commissioner Ashland. Is that right?
Can someone clarify? I had on my calendar that there was an EIR meeting before council, or planning and transportation. Is it still tomorrow?
No.
No. As it turns out, it doesn't have to go back to planning and transportation. It's going directly to council, which we didn't know last month, but it goes directly to council at this point. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I add one more announcement? You all probably got an email inviting you to the State of the City Council reorganization, January 6th at 7 p.m. That's where they announce the new mayor, new vice mayor. It's kind of a fun event. For those of you who haven't been, you might want to put it on your calendar.
That's here in the chambers, yes.
Okay, if there's no other business, we'd entertain a motion to adjourn until next year.
I think the email said it's here.
21st is it's the tentative date, right? Or do you want to just officially move it to that? We could do that.
Difficult is, and I'll see what I can do, but I'll just see what I can do. We're not,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. So we're not going to reach agreement. So
Okay.
I don't want to hold it up if that's what works for most.
All right, let's go to the 21st then. All right, motion for adjournment, please. Someone?
A second.
All right, stand adjourned.
Yes, Happy New Year. Well, last week was Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, Well, yes, he was the day before, thank you. Yes, all on the same day. It was just, and I just said to him, honey, we're doing Hanukkah on Christmas because something's got to give. We took
early this year.
too
It's just
early.
Thanksgiving, no one's
No,
ready.
no, and we had that holiday planned for months. And
Because we celebrate both in my family this year.
I don't-
just skipped Hanukkah.
if there are lobsters involved and like what, yeah.
So, how was your trip to Hawaii?
It was lovely. I'd never been to Kauai.
Oh, you went to Kauai?
And it was really lovely, and I really enjoyed it. It stormed quite tremendously a couple of days.
Was there too? Yeah,
There was one night where it was thunder and lightning. Like, normally a thunder lightning storm lasts, an hour. It was all night, and it sounded like you were being bombed.
Oh, no.
But it was gorgeous. And,
You said you went to Kauai?
mm-hmm.
Yeah, because my father-in-law, he just got back today. He took a cruise and he left a couple of days before Thanksgiving.
I would have thrown up. I mean, the surf.
Oh my God, he looked really ill today when he came by my house.
No, seriously, we were going to go to the Nepali coast, which is on the northeast side of the island, northwest side of the island.
Yes.
But to go snorkeling, that's where you see the big turtles. And they said the surf there was 18 to 20 feet. I'm like,
You can't do
no,
it.
no.
Plus, there's those sleeper waves you have to watch out for. You don't
Yeah.
want your kids swept away when you're turning your head.
And Grandma.
I know we went for the first time last summer before last, and we went to the Big Island.
Yeah, oh, I've
with
been
my
there.
mom for her 80th birthday.
Those waves are
I know
death-defying.
I was so worried because right before we left, there was kids swept out to sea.
Oh, yeah.
Youth group. Well, right where the most popular place to see the great, where you can go see spinner dolphins.
Oh,
we
right.
definitely went there, and I was just like, I was watching.